Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another live stream sponsored by the Christian Comic Art Society. My name is Joffrey Strout, and today we are joined by comic book artist extraordinaire, Eric Jansen. Welcome, Eric. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Extraordinaire. That's great.
We will get into our discussion in just a moment, but if anyone in the audience wants to leave comments or ask questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments or the chat, and we'll do our best to include that as we go. So, all right, let's get started. So Eric, I've known you for a number of years, but the audience probably doesn't. So how about you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and your work, and we'll get into it.
Well, my name is Eric Jansen, and I'm a writer, artist, self-publisher, and I've been doing that for a long time. And I've also worked at a tract publisher. So I have a lot of tracts, and we did some comic books, and I did illustrations for other booklets there. So it's funny. On one hand, I have some things that have been seen by dozens of people. On the other hand, I've got some things that have been seen by millions of people. And so I self-published under God and Country Graphics, and I did my first couple of books like 20-something years ago, and then went to work for the tract publisher. And so now I'm just starting to self-publish again. And I've got like 6 books that I put together the last few months or so.
Okay. Well, so why don't we talk a little bit, like you have done a decent amount of work over the years. And so why don't we talk about like what sticks out to you as some projects that you've worked on that that were impactful for you in your life and your career.
Okay. I got some examples over here. This is a sort of a redone version of my first self-published comic book. I did Freedom Fighter, like 1997, the first issue, and now this is the 25th anniversary reissue of it. And this one really taught me how to self-publish and got me like 2 or 3 jobs with big, well-known publishers that didn't go anywhere, but it got my foot in the door at least. And then it also, I think it helped get me my job at the tract publisher. And I know for sure it connected me to CCAS, because I forgot exactly how, but Ralph Miley and Don Ensign both saw it at some point and contacted me. And then I started going to CCAS meetings for like at least 20 years.
And so those who don't know that shorthand we use, it's the Christian Comic Art Society, and we're lazy, so we say CCAS instead. So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
CCAS.
Yeah, CCAS. Yeah.
For short, and CCAS for real short.
Yeah. So when you said that one comic kind of got you a decent amount of like your foot in the door at different opportunities, was that because you were that you self-published it yourself and then went showing it to people, or how did that play out?
Well, I showed my samples to a bunch of people, and one small company, well, it was actually the samples of Batman fighting a werewolf that got me a few jobs. Somehow I did a really good job of Batman fighting a werewolf. And those samples took me all the way. No, but that did get me connected to a small publisher that wanted me to illustrate one of their books, and they also wanted me to write and draw a project of my own. And Freedom Fighter is the one that I chose, and then my relationship with that publisher sort of fell apart. So I had the first issue all done, and then I had plans for the next 12 issues in my head. And so I went ahead and self-published it on my own. But working with that small publisher also helped me, because just learn how to self-publish. So it wasn't wasted effort.
So
I guess I misspoke. The Batman drawings got me a bunch of jobs that didn't go anywhere, but the Freedom Fighter comic got me self-publishing, and I think it also helped get me the job at the track publisher.
Okay. So that's so you mentioned the track publisher. Tell us a little bit more about that. How did you get in there, and what was that like?
Yeah, that is Foursquare Missions Press. I come out of the Foursquare denomination, and I also went to Bible school, and I was a youth pastor. And so at some point I've been Pastor Eric, but that's beside the point. But so my Freedom Fighter book does have some Christian themes in it, but definitely Christian themes are in my Christ the Prophecy, which I did, showing how Jesus is shown in the Old Testament. And actually that was a tract that I was passing out on the streets. And then I turned it into a Sunday school lesson for like a four-week series. And then I turned all my research. There are like 330 prophecies of Jesus in the Old Testament. And so I pared that down to like 60 for the tract and also for the comic book. So I tell the life of Christ from that perspective. So it's sort of like a teaching comic book. And I showed that to the tract publisher when, Force Commissions Press, or FMP, we'll shorten that one to FMP. So I showed that to FMP, and just Freedom Fighter showed that I knew publishing. And then Christ the Prophecy showed other things that were valuable to the tract publisher, FMP. And then I asked them if they wanted to publish that. I had done it like 7 years earlier, and no publisher wanted it. And so I sent photocopied versions to like all my favorite comic book creators. And I remember getting like letters back from Jim Shooter, David Michelini, Sal Buscema. So some people were really nice, and other people, but they also told me, "Oh, this isn't going to sell anywhere. You can't market this." But then I basically, offered it to FMP, and we had to fix up some things and re-letter it and everything. But within a year, we were publishing it, and since then, FMP does print runs of all their stuff, like once or twice or 3 times a year. So in the 20 years since I offered it to FMP, it's probably been published and distributed all over the world about 150,000 times. So the 75 copies that I sent to comic book creators, I was happy enough that, okay, there's 3 months of my life at least, but at least I, witnessed to 75 people. But it was nice starting 7 years later that it started to reach 150,000 people.
Yeah. Well, so now, for those who may not be familiar with the term tract, those would be evangelistic stories or materials that are given away, printed, and then given away for free. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, you could also have political tracts, but religious tracts come in a variety of sizes. The chick tracts are like little booklets. They're usually little stories, little tiny comic books. You actually, technically, a tract should not have a staple in it. So a tract is a piece of paper that you can fold. So I did or redid like about 30 tracts, folded tracts at FMP. Through the years, and so they keep getting reprinted, and so some of those were printed in the millions. Like one tract that I redid, it was just sitting in a drawer because they had, I don't want to put anybody down, but they had some horrible artwork on some of their old stuff that they just didn't want to print it anymore. But so I salvaged some of those and redrew them, and I took this one called 4 Steps to Heaven, and I sort of redrew it with like Jim Starlin style in mind. So I was taking my comic book history and putting it into the Christian tract. And that one, I know for sure. I left FMP like 6 years ago. I'm still friends with them and we do stuff sometimes. But by the time I left 6 years ago, that had been printed like about 3 million times in like 13, 14 different languages.
Wow.
So there's a little bit of Jim Starlin witnessing, all over Africa, South America, and other places.
Wow, that's
so
cool.
we did a lot of folder tracks. Then I did some other, well, like here's one of my booklet tracks. This is, again, the Life of Christ. I've done the Life of Christ for FMP like 4 different times, 4 different versions. This one is a 32-page booklet, just 2-color. But basically, it's the whole story of the gospel, the Bible, from beginning to Genesis to Revelation, pared down to 32 pages. So that's also been printed maybe 150,000 times. And then I did this after I left FMP, and I offered that to them too. This is a little 8-page comic booklet. It's smaller than a regular one, but it's bigger than a tract. And so here, this is the Life of Christ down to 8 pages. And then I did I don't have it here, but I also did, I added illustration to a Gospel of John that FMP publishes. So that's, I tried my most realistic, and that's black and white, and it's with the text of the Bible book, John. So those are all giveaways. But the tracks can be folded, but we can also call the booklets tracks too, because it just gets the point across. And but then we move up into booklets and books and what have you.
Yeah, it seems like the term tract has become kind of the term for the purpose more than the format, somewhat maybe different than it used to be.
Like graphic novels has taken over for the term trade paperback, reprint collected editions.
Right. Yeah.
It gets the point across.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then you mentioned Paraman as another project that kind of stuck out to you.
Oh, yes. After the Christ of Prophecy, sort of got my boss at FMP interested in the possibility of comic books. This idea just sort of hit me out of the blue. I mean, I've been creating characters and got stories in my mind since I was 7, but this one hit me out of the blue, and I came up with Paraman, and I did another 8-page. This is like the first 8-pager that we did at the FMP, and we had to like run this by all sorts of pastors and missionaries, like, oh, he's flies and he's a superhero. Is that something you'd be interested in? Well, yeah, they were interested. And it turned out that one's been printed about 500,000 times now in 3 different languages, French, English, and Spanish.
So that one also has an evangelistic message as well as
like
a story going on.
I don't want to, I don't want to say, oh, I'm copying Superman or anything, but he's like, okay, he's like a Superman type, and one of his enemies got saved in prison, and the enemy comes to witness to Paraman. So you have the bad guy witnessing to the good guy. So a little bit of a twist, and that seems to been the interesting part that maybe got people to like it. And but then that opened the door to a lot of other 8-pagers that we did at FMP. We did about I was part of 10 different ones. Either I wrote and drew them, or I drafted some of my CCAS friends, and then we did about 3 or 4 other ones that I was the editor on. So FMP has about 10 evangelistic 8-page comic books or tracks that one ministry in New Jersey especially was, it all came together at the same time. I was wanting them to to produce comic books, and then this big ministry in New Jersey wanted comic books to distribute on the street. So we did them specifically for people we could call street people. Like I did one for prostitutes, and then we did another one for gang members and another one for drug addicts. So that shows not only can comic books be used for the gospel and evangelism, but also to reach people where they are and address certain issues at the same time.
Yeah. So what I find interesting about what you're describing is that from what I have read of the books you've done, while there are evangelistic aspects to the stories are still, a lot of those stories are still stories that are interesting to read by themselves anyway. They're not just it's not just a purely front to back evangelistic it's not just listing an evangelistic message just put it into comic format. There's a story to it.
Yeah, all the ones that I've done, I really felt inspired to do. It wasn't like, oh, this is drudgery and I have to like figure out a way to beat people over the head with the gospel. No, these were like stories that came to me organically, and I think to the other people that were involved too for the other few issues. And they're actual stories, and you like the characters. And I like Paraman so much, I continued with Paraman, and I've been we did a second one at FMP, or I did a second one that I offered FMP that they sometimes print, and that's mostly for Halloween. But then I kept going, so I have like 9 Paraman stories that I finally collected, and I've been published. I printed them on my own.
So that's cool. Like that's something that you've done that I think I thought was just really genius. Was like the 8-page stories, which are very small, right? And you were able to in your neighborhood, you're able to give them to trick-or-treaters who are coming up for candy, and I thought that was pretty cool. Like that's a
my boss didn't want all the 8-pagers that I offered him, so some of them I ended up printing on my own. Like Scruffy is basically a talking animal, and he didn't really think, my boss didn't think that talking animal would be the best thing. It's like, okay, that's fine. But then I printed it on my own, and everybody loves Scruffy. So I did some other ones on my own. So I really got into the groove of producing 8-page stories. Eight pages is a great size to get like one point across. And I've been reading a lot of Golden Age comics lately, and they did a lot of stuff with 8 pages. And Will Eisner did classic work on the Spirit in just 8 pages, or at some point it was 7 pages. And these are some of the best comic book stories ever. So I didn't plan that. That was something that was sort of just inspired or grown in me at FMP, starting with Paraman. And then I just got into that 8-page mental mindset ever since then. I'm still doing some 8-page. In fact, the longer stories that I do, I cut into like 8-page chapters, and it's just it's a great format, or a great way to present a story, especially one that has like a single point. And even if it's a chapter of a longer story, that chapter should have one main point.
Well, it's something that I've actually been impressed by, is just seeing your work, how well you work in the 8-page format. Like when if someone were to ask me to do something in 8 pages, I'd be like, I can't fit anything in that space. But I consistently read what you've written and drawn, and it's like it's a full story. But it sounds to me still like, no, there's not enough space. But you regularly do it, and do it well. So I'm impressed by that.
Well, thank you. And it's not something I tried to do. It's just something that sort of just happened.
Yeah. And well, it's definitely a skill. I think, it's one of those things where it's like, as you approach as an artist trying to approach a medium, I think there's a challenge sometimes to try to do that. Also, I think you mentioned also that you write and draw these. I think that might be one aspect that makes it work well, is that you're not just drawing it, you're also writing. You're sort of doing both duties. How do you think that's impacted your workflow or your approach to comics, the fact that you're doing both?
Well, I feel like I always wanted to do that ever since I was a kid. But I did try to get work just as an artist. I can switch gears. I can be a writer artist. I can just be an artist. I don't know if I could just write for somebody else, because when I type things out, there's a lot of shorthand. It's like I don't have to describe everything. I know what it looks like in my head. So my story plots or scripts are very spare. But it definitely helps because the writer and the artist, well, if you're a team, they should work together and they can play off each other. A lot of the great comic book teams work closely. Like a lot of the artists help with the plot. But if you're the same person, it's like the artist side of my brain and the writer side of my brain are working very much in tandem. And sometimes the writer part will it knows what the artist part wants to draw and what the artist part really doesn't want to draw.
That's right.
And so the writer and me will adjust things to accommodate the artist, and somewhat vice versa, I suppose.
Now you mentioned there was a project you have worked with people who you are writing and you're drawing and they're writing, right? Like you mentioned your Silver Wolf book.
Yeah, Kevin Young is part of CCAS. I've known him ever since I joined. He's one of my best friends, and besides that, he's just a really good writer. I mean, if not for regular life interfering, he should be working at one of the big companies, and he would do a really good job. Here's a book that we did together. CCAS also has called an apazine called Alpha Omega, where it's just photocopied magazine that we distribute amongst the members. And Kevin and I mean, just for critiques and stuff and to work things out and a fellowship. But Kevin and I have put hundreds and hundreds of story pages in there. I mean, they're not totally finished. I don't take them all the way to the inking stage. And, it's first draft for him on the scripting. But so when I say I work with Kevin a lot, maybe we're not getting paid for it, but we have definitely produced a lot. But here's one that we did for Alpha Omega that we liked so much that we had to publish it for real. And this is available on Amazon. This is the first of 3 volumes of Silver Wolf. And here's one again. I didn't ink it. I didn't take it to the inking stage, but we got Larry Blake. You can't really see anything, but there's Larry. That's Larry Blake inking me. And if a lot of people in the Christian comic book
community
subculture probably know Larry Blake, because he's like the master of self-publishing, or he's been doing some amazing work for decades now, and he's got thousands of pages under his belt. So anyhow, Silver Wolf was just a teen superhero and we created a bunch of villains for him, and we started doing it for fun for Alpha Omega, and we just liked it, and it kept going, and then we took it to the 12th chapter, and we gave him a good solid ending to the whole sort of continuing arc there, and so now we're publishing it. And so I do have, and then I have some other things that I've sort of helped out our other friend Ralph Miley from CCAS, and he and Kevin also work together, and they've produced a few books, and I've been part of their stuff. So there's like what four or five books on Amazon that I've been a part of
Nice. And
with
so
Kevin and or Ralph.
right, yeah, yeah. You mentioned that. So there was also a book you worked on where you didn't you not as an artist but as a writer. You just went into put on the writing hat purely.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's also on Amazon. I did a novel called Jonas Quest, and it's sort of reminiscent of the old pulp fiction novels of like Doc Savage and The Shadow, I hope. And I like it. That's also sitting there on Amazon. I haven't really publicized it, but it's there, and I am proud of it. And I have gotten some attention just for my writing. Like I sent Freedom Fighter out to a bunch of companies to get art jobs, and like one company wrote me back, and they were interested in me just for my writing. So that was very that was a compliment, because you sometimes in comics people want to do both, and maybe they can't really do both, or they're not as good on the writing side as they are on the drawing side.
Yeah, that's true.
But hopefully, I mean, ever since I was young, I have considered myself both. And I can separate them, and I can put them together, and I do like to do both. And
Yeah,
I mostly, sometimes I go years, and all the drawing I do is just to tell the story. I've sort of, the last few years, I've gotten back into just sketching. So then I filled up, like, I got like 20 sketchbooks that are just full of art. But before that, for like 20 years or something, like almost every piece of artwork I did was to service a story.
And that seems to be one of the defining features to, I think, those people who are most attracted to the comic book as a medium is that it's not just something. If, say, an artist is attracted to the medium, it usually seems to suggest that, like, and this seems to be fairly common, consistent amongst those I know who are in the field, is that they love the story as much as the art. So it's not just like, oh, they wouldn't be happy just doing art by itself, because the story also is important to them. So it seems like your work is somewhat along those lines.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, let's go back up a little bit, and let's talk about your origin story creatively. How did you get into just being an artist, or pursuing creativity as a career? How did you get started?
Well, I think everybody draws, in kindergarten or nursery school or whatever. And then some people just don't quit. And I'm one of those that just never quit. I do have this memory going back to kindergarten or first grade or something. And all the kids are sitting around downtime and just drawing. And I was drawing a biplane that I saw somewhere. I don't even know where. And the teacher was just so impressed. I was like, I don't know if that sparked something in me, but the teacher was just raving about this biplane that this little 4 or 5-year-old was drawing. And that stuck with me to this day. And so I just never let go. And then of drawing, and I went to like a private school that it wasn't a hoity-toity private school, but it was a private school that would like sort of babysit if both my parents worked, and so the school would babysit us, and for like 3 hours a day, when we had to stay all day being babysat. I had like 2 friends, at least 2 friends that also drew. We all liked comic books. I started reading comic books when I was like 7, and that was like Archie and Richie Rich. And then I started reading Marvel and DC, Spider-Man, Superman, and Captain America is my favorite, when I was like 9. So after like 9, that's when I started like thinking of my own characters to draw and do stories of. And so my friends, Harry and John, they also like comic books and like to draw. So I remember the three of us would just draw for 3 hours. We could have been doing our homework, but in that babysitting period, but we mostly draw and compare our drawings and characters that we would create, and yeah, I just kept going with that. And then I think they sort of maybe lost interest. I don't know. I reconnected with Harry later, and he got into computers, so he still was sort of doing some sort of artwork, but not. He was so impressed that I was a comic book guy, even though it's like, okay, I've had like 3 jobs that didn't go anywhere, but but doing it yourself, that's what you do. I am a comic book guy. But so back then, for my childhood, I went to the same school for years, from nursery to like 11th grade, and we would just draw and create characters and stories. And like one of the characters I created back then, I've still done a couple of stories just very recently. I'm typing stories for him, and I've drawn a couple of his stories in the last few years. And so these things stick with you. They're almost like your children. Your characters are your children. So anyhow, I did that in my childhood, and then I did go to. I took art classes at college, but I don't know if they taught me anything. But it was great to just sit down and do the work. But I mean, not to brag, but I was like one of the 2 or 3 best in the class right from the get-go. And the teacher always put things up in the glass cases in the hallway. And so I was always in the glass cases. So again, that's nice. That's nice to get encouragement. And but I should mention my dad. My dad was an artist, so I don't know if I inherited anything. He didn't really sit down and teach me how to draw, but I just sort of maybe I knew things inherently. And he even liked comic books, going back to the 40s, and he thought up some characters, and he would draw them for me out of his head, out of memory, to just so I could have something to color. There weren't photocopy machines everywhere, so I was like coloring his originals. And so I remember a bunch of his characters, and I've tried to incorporate them into my stories too. But he never pursued it. He didn't think there was any money in it. But he did go to work for the studios, and he, especially like Paramount and Desilu. So he worked on Star Trek and Mission Impossible, and he worked for this other little studio where they did a lot of commercials, and I helped him with that. But it was like painting sets, but for like Star Trek or the other ones, sometimes he had to do signs or make something look like a window that wasn't a window, and things like that. So I was around his artwork, and he, his artwork helped tell some stories too.
It's true. Yeah, that's cool.
And then I kept going in my 20s. I tried to, I always sent in samples to the companies, and nobody liked my work for the longest time. And I do remember at some point I started praying over my work. Before I started drawing at the drawing table for the evening, I would pray over it and ask God to guide me and help me. And at that point, I do believe there was like a sort of a quantum leap in the quality of my work. And one of the evidences of that's when I did the 4 pages of Batman fighting a werewolf with some really good backgrounds and everything, and that started getting me some jobs.
So do you feel like you mentioned the it took a while before you started to get some traction. And it seems like I hear that a lot from those who've sort of made the break in. They have to work for quite a while before they get that opportunity. Do you feel like there's anything else that that are challenges that you ran into creatively that you had to overcome that you think others might run into? Sort of common pitfalls or challenges that you could share what they were and how you overcame them.
Yeah, I think so. Well, like I said, I did make a leap at some point, and maybe I could draw like a picture well before that, but then comic books are all about storytelling, so it doesn't really matter if you can draw a pretty picture. You have to be able to tell a story, and then there's the whole craftsman aspect of comic books. You have to be able to draw everything. You have to be able to draw clothes and buildings and cars and horses and hands. And so after my prayer started and after the leap, I just kept drawing. I would draw and draw and draw. I don't remember exactly what the saying is, but there's something about putting in 1,000 hours of work or 10,000 hours of work.
I think it's usually 10,000 hours. Yeah.
How much?
It's 10,000 hours
10,000.
to gain mastery of some skill.
So even though, maybe I'd already put in 10,000 just for sketching, but I for sure hadn't put in 10,000 for drawing a story. So over the next few years and up to this day still, and going back to what I said about working with Kevin and Alpha Omega, drawing hundreds of pages of stories, you just sort of have to figure things out. And you can't get to that point without doing it, without putting the work in. So there's a spiritual aspect to me advancing, but then there's also the earthly, logical, obvious aspect to me advancing just by practicing, keep on going. And probably the same thing with writing. I probably need to put in maybe a few more 1,000 hours of writing to get where I need to be, maybe. But the storytelling, the artwork, I'm sure I put in 10,000 now, and I'm much more confident in my storytelling, which is laying out a page, telling the story, figuring out the angles, the camera angles. A lot of it is like movie making, and I think Stan Lee used to act out what the characters were doing. So he'd like jump up on a desk and show his artists that this is how the character should look, and those are the stories at least. Huh. So you have all that stuff to figure out with a comic book, and so I don't know. Does that answer the question?
Oh yeah, I mean it makes a lot of sense. So the 10,000 hour thing seems to be really key. I mean, there may be some people on the planet who don't need the 10,000 hours to be amazing, but it seems like a lot of the skills do need time and energy. They take that effort and consistency. So that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's, as somebody who's studying writing, after I've been drawing most of my life, I do also see what you're saying about needing to put the hours in for writing. Like you have been clearly putting in the writing for all the books you've written. So that's, that's time put into towards that 10,000. But I think we've all read books by really talented artists who haven't really written anything, and the books just are not strong in the writing because they haven't been studying writing or doing writing as long. So I think that is a very important aspect. It doesn't come automatically No matter how good you are at one thing, the other thing doesn't necessarily come automatically without the work. So, so are there any common, let's say, pitfalls? Like if you were, you've been not just doing comics, but you've been around comics for many years. And so if you were to say there were any common pitfalls that kind of trip the artists up, or that you can think of, or have tripped you up, or you've had to avoid, what would some of those be?
Well, there is the double-sided coin of thinking you're better than you are, and then also the other side is having no confidence in what you're doing. It's like, there's that middle ground where you have to be able to assess your talent honestly, and where you are. And once you do that, you can really figure out what you need to work on. Like I know I needed to work on hands. So yeah, I brought out the tracing paper and I just traced like hundreds of hands, and that helped me, and besides tracing, then I would also just sketch hands. I remember for a while there, I was taking my sketchbook everywhere, and I would cut out like photocopies of hands and tape them to blank pages in my sketchbook. So anytime I went to lunch or had to wait for oil change or whatever, I'd pull out the sketchbook, and there'd be that picture of the hand at the top of the page, and then I'd be drawing the hand at the bottom of the page. And stuff like that. You got to figure out your weaknesses and work on those. But there's also the other side where, don't let somebody tell you you're bad if you're not bad. Don't let somebody tell you, oh, you'll never make it, if you really aren't going to make it. And I do remember when I was still trying to get comic book work I'd go to Comic-Con with my portfolio and sit at the portfolio reviews, or a lot of the time I would walk around to the booths. Forget about waiting in 2 hours in line at the portfolio review. Just go to an editor at the booth, and that helped a lot. But I do remember one time I was showing one editor at one booth my artwork, and he was raving about my backgrounds. It's like, oh, all these buildings. Oh, this is great. This is one of your strengths. He was just raving about it. And then within half an hour, I went to another booth and I showed my portfolio, the same portfolio, to another editor. And he was telling me, oh, your backgrounds suck. You really have to work on those. It was like, okay, listen to everybody and listen to nobody. Because people don't really know what they're talking about, or really what they're doing is. And especially if you ask another artist to assess your work, they're going to look at it from their perspective. So if they're a really cartoonish artist and they look at your middle of the road artwork, they're going to give you advice on how to make it more cartoonish. And you go to another artist that's really realistic, and he looks at your middle of the road artwork, and he's going to tell you how to make it more realistic. So I just try to keep all this stuff in mind. And then there are a lot of comic book artists that I really love, and there's such a variety. Like Neil Adams is totally different than Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko or Gene Colan or a ton of other ones. But you can learn something from studying all of them. And especially for comic book artwork, you sort of do want to find that middle ground. You don't want you don't want the shift to be jarring, but sometimes you should be able to draw realistically, and you should be able to draw fantastically, as the case may be, and to make the transition between the two as smooth as possible. So it doesn't look like you just put a photograph inside, a cartoon.
Yeah, it has to match, right? The world.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier, like you
Oh, the other,
mentioned,
sorry,
oh,
another pitfall or another advice, just learn your tools, because you know, I wish I had a bunch of inkers to ink all my stuff, but I don't. So I have to ink my own work most of the time. And my inking was not as good as my penciling, but I just kept trying, kept going with it because I had to, and I got better and better. But also I tried different things, and I knew I was more of a pen guy than a brush guy. But some people are really good with brushes and not so good with pens, and then there are so many different pens to try or brushes, and there are a lot of techniques. There's a lot of the artwork can change just by using a different tool. Like you can use a thick pen and make it look cartoonish, or you can use a tiny little thin point, and then maybe it looks realistic or really detailed. But that is something else. Just I had to draw a lot of hands. I had to put in the hours, and I had to learn my tools.
Hmm. So what's the difference between before you learned your tools and then after? Like what was the cost of not learning the tools yet?
It was harder work before. Like that's another thing I prayed about, and God granted. Before I was slow, and now I'm very fast, and I can do the same quality or better as I could before, but in half the time or quicker even.
Hmm.
And I go through a process now. I really, that's another thing. I learned a process where I really sketch things out on typing paper, and then I blow it up and put it on the light table and transfer it to a bristle board. And that saved me so much time and effort. I hate erasing. I don't have to erase anything. I'm just tracing my own work onto another piece of paper, basically. And I can leave the bad stuff out and know where to put the good stuff in, and don't have to worry about corrections. And if you've worked everything out on your layouts, then you're not sitting there on the final artboard erasing and repositioning figures and stuff. So the more you do, the more confident you are of your tools, the quicker it goes and the easier it goes. And I mean, all artwork can be frustrating, but especially comic book artwork, where sometimes you have to be very precise. You get the rulers out and everything. That can really be frustrating if you put in hours on a panel and then you realize it's totally the wrong perspective, or things aren't matching up, or lining up, and then you just have to start over, maybe start over the whole page, and just it's awful. But it's good to get to that point where you know where the pitfalls are and how to avoid them.
Yeah, you mentioned you mentioned praying, and then the Lord kind of, the answer to the prayer was allowed you to move faster. Now, I think that I'm curious about that. Did that mean that you changed your approach, or you did things differently, because the Lord sort of led you to do things or approach things differently, or did you just notice you were working quicker than previously?
I think that's when I developed my technique, which, it's funny, the more stages I put in, the quicker things go. So instead of putting everything on one sheet of paper, from the basic sketches to the final product, so many things can go wrong. But when I do 4 stages of thumbnails, layouts, pencils, inks, there's just more room to correct things. But anyhow, so that's one of the things. But also, I do think there was just sort of a switch flipped in my head where I just got better. I just got better and faster. The practice helped, learning the tools helped. But there's just something internal that got tweaked somehow.
Well, that kind of leads me to my last question. I'm curious about, like, I think we've probably all met artists who, like you mentioned, praying about your art, and I've done that as well. And also, I would also say, like, that's not my first instinct. My first instinct was just like to sort of do the grind and put the work in and approach it, where my faith wasn't really connected to my art so much. And that seems to be kind of a common approach amongst other artists that I know, even if they're believers. It seems like their art is somewhat disconnected from their faith. And I'm not sure why that is. I'm curious. So I'm curious if you've run into any hurdles or obstacles that keep artists from connecting their faith and their art better or more consistently. Or if there's any aspects of that connection that you've experienced are had a challenge to them. I'm just curious.
Definitely. I mean, I think the enemy, the devil, however, I mean, I don't know if Satan himself is, right behind me trying to prevent me from doing comic books, but whatever his influence on Christians is, or his attacks on Christians, I think he wants to keep us out of the arts, because the arts are influential. So I think a lot of Christians are being tricked or attacked or in whatever way convinced that they shouldn't be an actor. They shouldn't be, try to be a movie director or work in television or work in comic books, or it's all just, oh, it's vanity, or it's useless, or you're never going to make it. Just go get a regular job, sit at a desk, or, work, repairing something. Those are where we should be. It's like, so that leaves all the influential creative jobs to non-Christians or anti-Christians, people that hate God or are promoting some opposite message. And it's like, no, I think God wants us, everywhere. I think he wants a Christian in every office, and he wants a Christian on every movie set and TV set, TV show set, and at every comic book company, and etc. Because we should not buy into the lie that we shouldn't be doing these things. It's like, oh, or we should only be doing evangelistic comic books or something. It's like, okay, if you're a Christian plumber, are you only going to do Christian plumbing? It's like, that doesn't make any sense. You just do the work and do it well, and just the quality of your work and the quality of your character will be evangelistic, or not every story has to be, overtly evangelistic, or of course we should stay away from, obvious evil projects or whatever, but we should not let the enemy discourage us in any way.
Does anything stick out to you as ways that the enemy discourages you? You mentioned the discouraging in terms of the overall, like, endeavor, the discouragement of, like, it's not, it's vanity, it's not something that's worthwhile, you shouldn't be involved with it. Is there anything that sticks out in terms of, like, the day-to-day creative, like doing the work itself, that you see that's a challenge that believers have to run into, might have to deal with?
Oh, I don't know, because I don't. I don't really feel discouraged. I've made my peace with that a long time ago with what I do. I feel like this is what I'm here for. It's anything that comes between me and making my comic book stories. Uh, that's from the enemy. that's that's something that's trying to prevent me from doing what God put me on this earth to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, we are running out of time. So I guess last thing, if you were to say, if you could encounter yourself from the past, if you could give your, younger version of yourself any advice or that if you could give yourself from the past advice, what would be the most important thing you would say to yourself?
Oh, well, the only thing that comes to mind, especially concerning art, is if you go to art school. I didn't really go to art school. I'm mostly self-taught, even though I took those classes at college. I said they didn't really help me, I don't think. But like if I had gone to a real art school and learned how to really paint and I think when you're self-taught, you can do it, but it takes longer. I mean, I'm still learning. I've been doing this for half a century, and I'm still learning. And maybe if I had taken some real art classes at an art school, maybe even a comic book art school, I would have learned a lot of these lessons a lot sooner.
Hmm. And for those who may not know of any, are you aware of any particular art schools that you think are have programs that you think are strong? If anyone were watching, wondering where they might go.
Well, I just know about the Joe Kubert School, but that's on the other coast. I have visited Art Center in Pasadena, and I've seen a lot of great work by the students there. Something like that would have helped me. I really wish I could have gone there like 25 years ago or something. But then also, I have also seen like some universities, sometimes they've hired like artists that I know from the comic books that are teaching a class. Like they don't have a whole program, but it might be like one class at this university 50 miles away or something. And you might want to look into that.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to find somebody that teaches like how to do a storybook. I have a couple children's books, storybook ideas that I want to do just right. And of course, my skills are like regular comic book skills, and I need to. At this stage, I still want to learn other skills like how to do a storybook.
Yeah. And I should just want to add there, just to chime in that we're living in an era where it's unprecedented how many great teaching resources are available online. It used to be you had to go to the big art center schools to get really good instruction, and now people who maybe they're one of the better children's illustrators, they might have their own class that you could find online. So for anybody who wants to do something specific like that, and they might just want to encourage anybody who's looking for training to look around. There are some great schools that are teaching this stuff. I think we should do a panel on that, just where the good places are to find training. All right, well, we're basically out of time now. So Eric, if you had you mentioned some of your books are possibly coming in the future, and if you were just going to direct people to find your work online, where would you direct them to go?
Well, you could find my evangelistic stuff mostly at foursquaremissionspress.com or .org. I think both take you to the same place. Look under resources and comics. And then I have the few things on Amazon. But I do plan to, I have printed a bunch of things I plan to have at conventions. Like here's my full, here's Paraman in comic book form with these are my other stories that I've done with Paraman. Oh, here's some other characters. They're Scruffy and Stalker. And I do plan to, so I have printed all my Paraman stories, but I'm still working on more, and I am working on other ones. These comic books I printed mostly for the convention circuit. So I don't have a way to sell them to anybody online right now, but hopefully we'll get back to conventions sometime in the new year, maybe.
And maybe I can convince you to get a website to put your stuff on soon.
Gee, that's a good idea, John.
I know.
Maybe.
I'm working on it to try to make that happen. So, all right. Well, you guys, thank you, all of you who've joined us. We appreciate you joining us. And Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us and kind of share your story. It's been great.
Thanks a lot. God bless.
All right. Take care, everybody. And we will probably, we usually do these every week. So if anybody is interested in watching more of these, we usually do them every week on Thursdays in the evenings. And the next one, I think next week is, we're getting real close to Christmas. So we may take a break, but in the future, the plan is to continue doing these. So, all right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great week.